You alright? Welcome to the first video on this channel as the Northern Documentarian. I had some really great feedback on that whole rebrand, so thank you very much for that. This is a very fitting video to follow the rebrand, as this is the start of a series that I'm going to be calling Let's See History. I have a great interest in history, and this, plus my obsession for preservation and my love for photography, has quite naturally meant that over the years I've amassed quite the collection of local history books, and many of those are packed full of images and old photos. In this series, we're going to explore these old books, revisit these locations, learn about some of the history. We're going to look at the old photos, possibly reshoot some of them, and in general, we're going to learn about and see history. You can probably guess why I named the series as I did. But before we jump into any one book, let's have a little look at my collection so far. This will be a little bit of a teaser of what's to come in the future episodes in this series. So let's have a look at them. Now, I like old stuff and I like cheap stuff. So you'll often find me in vintage shops or antique shops and in charity shops. And all of these books, bar a few from my grandparents, have been found in one of those places. Two shops in particular that have always had a good stock of local books are Yesterday's Vintage in Northallerton and Needful Things in Hartlepool. Be it Teesside, Middlesbrough, Stockton, Norton, Billingham, Cleveland, Hartlepool, North Yorkshire, County Durham, there's books and photos for it all, covering the height of the industry, the growth of our towns, the old and beautiful buildings, rolling fields. It's all been documented. And instead of having all of that just sit within closed books, we're going to take a look. Now, with all of these books and all of these places, I wondered where to start the series off. Do I start with somewhere more known, like Borough, or maybe the famed industry? No, we'll get to all of that, and there's a lot of that to get to. But to start, we're going to go with Norton. Although I live just over the border in Billingham now, I grew up in Norton, just a street away from the village high street. So the vast majority of my childhood memories are based in and around there. So naturally, it is a place that means quite a lot to me. And it is a beautiful, traditional old English village. And it is this book in particular that I'm picking out for today. This is a book called Victorian Norton from the Norton Heritage Group. And it's quite an extensive book, actually, with a lot of content. There's a lot of old photos in the book itself, although the quality of them is a bit rough. You can still make out the details you need to see. There's a lot of old names, a lot of old information, and a lot to dive into. Now, this is one of the books that I didn't buy from a shop. This is actually from my grandparents. And when I opened it up, these three images fell out. Now, of course, we're going to explore this book itself a little bit and read a little bit about the history of Norton in the Victorian times, but the focus of this video, Let's See History, is of course going to be these three photos. I know it says Victorian Norton, but not all of these photos are actually from the Victorian period. This one, for example, is from 1910, which of course is the Edwardian period. And this image, I would imagine, is probably even more modern. So even further away from the Victorian period. This one, however, looks about right, as it looks to be dated at the end of the 1800s, the end of the 19th century. So just before we go and try and reshoot these photos, I'm going to go over a bit of a summarised history of Norton. And whilst I do so, I'm going to flick through this book and let you see the pages and the images and the topics. And I'm also going to run some footage of the village as well, just to add some context to the history. Norton is actually one of the oldest settlements anywhere in the region, finding its origins back in the Anglo-Saxon times with evidence of settlements as early as the 7th century. In fact, down Mill Lane at the Big Field, there was an Anglo-Saxon pagan burial ground dug up and discovered, and a lot of interesting artefacts found, meaning of course that there were people settled here before the entry of Christianity to the island, or at least this part of the island. St Mary's Church is a prominent historical landmark, and it sits upon the village green. It was founded around 1020 AD and reflects the village's medieval roots. It is the only cruciform Anglo-Saxon church in Northern England, and naturally with that comes a Grade 1 listing, and of course it is the oldest building in the village. Moving forward in time a little bit to the medieval era, Norton was an agricultural village, centred around the church and the green. Now as time went on, it is inevitable that we hit the Industrial Revolution, which hit hard in Teesside. Stockton boomed, Middlesbrough was birthed and grew to be the biggest settlement in the region, and Billingham was hit pretty hard with the industry as well, but Norton managed to avoid much of the heavy industrialisation during the 19th and 20th centuries. Naturally, this meant it became a desirable residential area for industrial workers and merchants, as it retained its village charm and was a bit of an escape from the harsh industry that they were working in and surrounded by. And it's this that has led to the modern Norton we know today, as over the 20th century Norton expanded to accommodate for all of those that wanted to live in and around it. And now Norton Village is surrounded by a lot of different residential areas. That said, the village itself has still managed to preserve much of its historical character, especially around the village green, which is surrounded by Georgian and Victorian houses. Today it's known for its mix of historical heritage and modern amenities, serving as a suburban area with a strong sense of community. Although the village high street itself has become a regional hotspot for nights out with many a pub, restaurant, takeaway, the beating heart of Norton still remains the village green, with the duck pond and historic buildings surrounding it, the shops, cafes and pubs, all looking out onto the green. A little bit of trivia for you, the original Big Ben bell was actually forged right here in Norton. However, on the journey down to London, it cracked and broke, and instead of remaking it and trying the journey again, the Big Ben that we know and love today ended up being made elsewhere, so we lost our chance at that one. Anyway, let's take a few photos. Right, I don't need a close up of my chin, believe it or not. Does that look close enough? Need to move over that way a bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to do one more. I'm going to zoom in a bit more. I need to be a bit lower.
Yeah. Cool. A bit lower then.
A bit further out now. Close enough, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I don't need to move a bit closer. That'll do. Try that. I don't think there's coffee in it. I think the machine messed up. I'll go change it.
That's just milk.
Zoom in a bit more. I mean me, for the next photo. And then I think that should be near enough, to be honest, without crawling into the middle of the road, which I'm not going to do.
Oh, no, there we are.
As you can see now, the village suffers from congestion issues because it wasn't built for these many cars. Stop. It might not be an exact perfect angle, but it shows the scene. So, that is the photos taken. I actually had to go back to reshoot the last one I'm going to show. That was a tricky one to work out where it is because that place has changed quite a lot. But the others, I did get first time. Now, I've edited them a little bit to try and warp them just to make sure that the sort of key features line up, because obviously I didn't shoot on the same cameras or the same lenses that we used on the original photos. So these aren't like bang on. It's not going to be like switching on a time filter to jump between them, but it is going to be pretty clear what's changed and what hasn't between the two places. The one that we're going to start with is this one. So this is Norton Green, actually at the duck pond, and this is very early 1900s by the looks of it. This actually has some information written on the back as well, so I'll shot that photo back up and I'll just go through some of the more interesting parts on here. So this opens up titled Children of Norton. And then it goes on to say this: the turn of the century dress of the young of Norton, boys and girls, rich and poor assemble around the village pump, a posed picture, nevertheless a gem. As in previous Norton heritage cards, we look from left to right. So, I'm going to pick out some of the more poignant and interesting points going in this image from left to right. West Row. These houses date from the late 1700s and originally were part of the medieval Toft and Croft layout, cottages with long gardens to the rear. The trees fronting West Row were planted in the 1890s, still in their animal protection surrounds, as cows and sheep were liable to eat or damage the young saplings and leaves whilst grazing or passing through the village. Which is crazy to think because I've never seen a cow or a sheep in the village, or anywhere near it for that matter. Such times seem pretty distant. Hello, Mina. I've had a little visitor. Hello, darling. No. It says here, the road was Darlington Lane via Fussick Railway Bridge, Milehouse Inn. I believe some of that might have changed now as well down that road. And then behind the tree line along the back is White House, a line of 5 cottages of the Anstey Trust. Of course, there is the old duck pond on the right. It says here, the Victorian perambulator leads us to the centre. The perambulator being the pram or the pushchair. It says here the boys are in Eton collars, knickerbockers, flat caps and boots. Stylish. The girls are dressed in 3 styles. The girls with the pram, hats, coats, scarves and button shoes. 2 to the right of the pump are village girls. The remaining 3 appear to have come out of the National School on the Green, wearing linen or cotton pinafores. The fact that there is schoolgirls and the little boy on the right makes it a weekday, this says. Also, nobody's on the green. Had it been a Sunday, the time 11 AM, which apparently they can tell from the sun shadow, I would have no idea. Had it been a Sunday, all would have been in the church, no shops open, and the tree cover suggests June or July. And then, last but not least, the magnificent village pump, which obviously is the focal point of this. And it says that the village pump was erected in the 1870s. This beautiful cast iron ornate cased pump sported a unicorn's head. One of the many fresh water springs below the village fed the water supply. The area around the pump is cobbled stones. Now here is the photo that I took. Reshaped a little bit to match up, and you can clearly see that quite a lot's changed and quite a lot has not. The pond is of course still there, the road still goes past. The houses on the left, West Row, they do still stand. Although the angle that I took it at wasn't bang on, but you can see that they're still there, it's the same houses. The White House cottages along the back are still there, looking strong and white as ever. But of course, the village pump has gone. I actually don't know what happened to the village pump. I'm going to look it up, and if I find out, I'm going to insert another clip after this. But if not, I guess the village pump was lost, forgotten, buried, God knows. Instead, now on the site where the village pump was, there is just benches. The scene has in reality changed quite a lot. Now, obviously, I took this in winter. It is January now, and this was taken June, July. So if you go back in June, July, there'd probably be quite a few more people out on the green. But even so, I think a lot more people back in the day used to gather and socialise on the village green. But even though a lot has changed, a lot has stayed the same, and the village green and the duck pond is still a beautiful little place. On to the next photo. So walking down the village high street from the duck pond, we get to the next shot, which is this one. This is a strip of houses, rather nice big brick houses I must say, on the side of the street, on the high street. Now I could not tell you what the date is on this one, but in the far left we can actually see a tram from the old tramway that ran through the village for many years, and in the middle there are 2 women who seem to be looking at the camera, wondering what's happening, I would presume. I'm not very good at dating clothes, but I would hazard a guess that was probably the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. If you've got any idea what decade these people look like they're from by their clothes, and do let me know. So again, the photo that I took isn't going to line up perfectly, but it's not far off. I did a bit of warping and moved a few bits about, and this is what I got. So as you can see clearly, all of these buildings still stand, and they are all rather nice looking, although some of them have changed colour a little bit over the years. Some of them have lost all of the leaves that are covering them, but still looking pretty grand. Now the little cordoned off island in the middle has changed a little bit, but there is still an island there, and trees do still stand. Now something that that's just my bird clock telling me we have passed yet another hour. Something I would like to point out is this old image is really quiet. There are no cars or anything blocking the paths or the road. And when you look at modern day, the cars are littered up and down the road and the path. Everything's more of an eyesore. I mean, that's just my opinion. You might absolutely love looking at Teslas. I personally don't. But this just looks really quiet and built for people, whereas the modern village looks like this, somewhere built for people, nice and quiet, has now had to deal with a massive influx of cars, and that is the truth. If you were to go through the old village like it is in these images, I dare say that you could walk down the full high street and see very little in the way blocking the paths and the roads, whereas now on both sides of the road itself there are cars parked from start to end, and even on the little pathway that you can see there, that is now parking for cars as well. So cars becoming so common and accessible is obviously good for getting about, but not so good for pretty villages. But in this one, I'd say not that much has changed, generally speaking. The cars are a big change, the lack of tram, sure, but the buildings are, of course, the focus here, and the buildings are much the same. This is a beautiful old village, and those buildings still stand strong. Now, the final photo that I reshot. This is the same high street we've just looked at, but a lot further down the way that we've been walking, so not the duck pond end, the other end. And this was a tricky one to try and get lined up, so much so that the first time I tried, I definitely wasn't stood in the right place, I don't believe, because so much has changed from this image. What's really cool is this was a postcard from 1910. It actually has postcard stuff on the back of it. So the focus of this is the tram, and you can see that the high street is dedicated to the tram lines, which I think is pretty cool. I would have preferred that than all the cars, if I'm being honest with you. But those buildings that are on the left there are now a strip of more modern shops, and they certainly do not quite look the part like they do in this old image. And like I said, this one was very, very hard to line up accurately because the buildings on the left have changed. The islands in between the roads and the path with the trees in them, they have changed. The road itself has changed. It's no longer a tramway, it is a completely relaid and reshaped road. Not entirely reshaped, but it's been altered. All of the stuff on the right is completely different. There is no longer a signpost or that lamp. None of that is there. In order to line up a bunch of old things which do not exist anymore with what currently exists isn't so easy, but this is the result that I got. Now, it might not be bang on, but it is a view taken from within meters of where this one was taken, and you can clearly see that a lot has changed in this image. Instead of trams, we now have just congestion and a ton of cars. The buildings on the left have gone from beautiful brick old English buildings to modern boxes with shop fronts. Those old lampposts and signs, they've all vanished, which is it's a shame to lose the history, but that is just modern progression, I do suppose. If anything, this one saddened me a little bit because the old village used to have so much character, and now it still has a lot of character, but nowhere near the levels it once did back in 1910. So that is it for this episode of Let's See History. It's been good fun to go back down Norton Village, to explore these old photos, to dive into this history, and I do hope that you've enjoyed this along with me as well. If so, there is of course more of this on the way, and if there is anything in specific you would like me to see, any of those books you'd like me to dive into, or any specific place to explore, drop it in the comments and you never know, I might well pick your suggestion for the next video. If you've got any other information, any little facts or little snippets of history that you would like to share about Norton, then please do just drop that in the comments, because I'm always willing to learn a little bit more, and I'm sure it'd be very interesting to open up those conversations. So that is always welcome. If you like this video, then please do drop a like, because it always helps. And if you'd like to see future episodes of this series and far more about documentaries, about storytelling, about photography, about film, and everything else that I do here on this channel, then hit subscribe, because as always, there is a lot more on the way. So sound for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure I've got no wispy bits of hair, because in that announcement video I had one bit coming off just like that and it looked